Douglas and I, the mere mention of his name is enough to make me feel irritated. We weren't the dream couple like those curated photos we used to post online. In truth, there was a bit of sweetness at the start, but sweetness can't sustain a relationship when one person has to carry everything while the other is only good at tossing out mocking jokes. That evening, I thought it would just be a simple night. Go to a party, nibble on some snacks, have a drink or two for fun, and head home early. Little did I know it would turn into the night that opened my eyes to Douglas's true self. Or rather, the person I had deliberately avoided seeing for over a year. I vividly remember the feeling when Douglas raised his glass, grinning like he was the star of the party, and let slip the phrase, "made with benefits." I wasn't shocked. I didn't get angry right then. What I felt most clearly was emptiness. A deep, gaping hole opened up inside me as if everything I had tried to nurture had just been kicked away by that one sentence. I didn't cry. I'm not the kind of girl who would stand in a crowd and shed tears because her boyfriend humiliated her. But I also wasn't strong enough to turn and walk away right then. I stayed. Maybe because I needed time to digest the truth. I no longer had any reason to stay in this relationship. Have you ever realized you've grown used to being disrespected? That's the scariest part. It wasn't Douglas's snide remarks that were the worst. It was the fact that I had once thought, he's probably just joking, every time he turned me into a punchline. How many times had I convinced myself of that? 10? 20? Or more? The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the worn-out window of the apartment, where most of the stuff belonged to me, I looked at Douglas, sprawled out asleep on the sofa, mouth slightly open, snoring softly. I realized something very clearly. I didn't hate him, really. I just felt sorry for myself, for wasting so much time before understanding that no one is born to be a housekeeper for someone who doesn't value them. I started packing my things, not the frantic packing of someone throwing a tantrum, but a calculated preparation. Every item I put into my bag was a reminder. This belongs to me, and I'm taking it back. I didn't need to take everything, just enough to remind myself that I could leave any time, and this time I really would. Douglas didn't notice anything unusual, of course. He never really paid attention. I cooked for myself alone. I didn't mention the trash, didn't touch the pile of dirty dishes. I stayed silent, and in that silence, I felt myself growing stronger each day. I'm not the type to make a big scene, so I waited for the right moment. When Douglas went to the gym as usual, Avery and I finished packing the rest. I left a note on the table, not an apology or an explanation, just a list of what he owed me. Not because I expected him to pay, but because I wanted him to see the cost of his carelessness. When I walked out that door, I didn't look back. Not because I was afraid of seeing Douglas chase after me, but because I knew no one would. People like him only chase attention, never the woman who once did everything for them. But you know what's funny? The moment he realized I was truly gone, the calls and texts came flooding in, like a kid left behind in a supermarket panicking to find their mom. But I wasn't his mom. I never was. I had just let myself become that person. I didn't respond, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I was busy living my life, a life I had neglected for too long while cleaning up someone else's mess. I didn't think leaving would feel so light. No tears, no dramatic goodbye, just me, a backpack, a few boxes, and silence. Avery said I was impressive, staying calm from start to finish, but she didn't know that inside my head it was chaos. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart tightened, not because I still had feelings for Douglas, but because I was afraid. Afraid I'd soften, afraid that the habit of forgiving that had trapped me for so long would pull me back. I stayed at Avery's place temporarily, in a small but warm room. She didn't ask much, just let me breathe, let me sort out my thoughts. The first night, sleeping on a sofa harder than I expected, I realized something. For the first time in ages, I didn't have to worry about what someone needed me to do the next morning. I didn't have to wake up early to remind anyone to take their laundry or check which bill was due. Freedom, it sounds grand, but it's really just being able to breathe at your own rhythm. Douglas, of course, didn't give up easily. His messages went from angry to pleading. A string of, "I didn't mean it, I was just drunk, you know I didn't mean that." I read enough to understand that none of it was for me. It was all about him, not knowing how to cope without me. Mutual friends started texting. Some were like, "It's probably just a fight, right?" Others said, "Don't be too upset." But when I casually dropped a few pieces of evidence, the times Douglas's jokes went too far, the money I had covered, the comments I had once laughed off, they went quiet. A few even messaged back, "Honestly, we thought you were really good at putting up with it." Good? I didn't feel proud of being good at enduring, at all. The days that followed were busier than I expected, not because of work, but because I had to relearn how to live for myself. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I did something just because I wanted to. A morning coffee I didn't have to brew for anyone else. A movie watched in the middle of the night without anyone complaining about the volume. I had even forgotten what it felt like to step into the kitchen without cleaning up before cooking. I visited my mom. She looked at me with eyes half worried, half relieved. "No, I told you so," just a simple, "Are you okay?" I nodded, and for the first time, that nod wasn't a lie to reassure someone else. Douglas got kicked out of the apartment just as I had predicted. Claire texted to thank me for helping her see some things clearly. I just smiled. I didn't need anyone's thanks. I was just glad I was no longer the one patching up the holes others created. But life isn't like the movies, where the heroine leaves a toxic relationship and instantly lives happily ever after. I had sleepless nights, not because I missed Douglas, but because I was afraid I'd make the same mistake again. I started writing. Not to vent, but to remind myself why I left. Every word was an old wound reopened, but also a way to let it heal completely. Once Avery looked at me, grinned, and asked, "What's next for you?" I thought for a moment and replied, "I think I'll learn to be busy with myself." And that was my real beginning, not when I walked out of that old apartment door, but when I realized I don't need anyone else to feel valuable. I noticed something strange a few weeks after leaving Douglas. I started hearing myself more clearly. Not my actual voice, but the one in my head, the one that had always been drowned out by things like, "Have you done this yet? Why didn't you remind me about that?" Or worse, the mocking jokes I had grown used to. Now, it was so quiet that at first it felt empty. But that emptiness turned out to be a space I had never had the chance to explore. I started filling it, not with responsibilities for others, but with the little things I had long forgotten. I bought a plant. Sounds silly, doesn't it? A girl who used to be buried in cleaning up someone else's mess now found joy in tending to a plant. But when I saw the first green sprout, I understood that this time I was nurturing something truly alive, not someone else's ego. Avery dragged me out for weekend strolls, making me try foods I never thought I'd eat. She said, "You need to reset your brain now. Stop living so safely." I laughed. It turned out all this time what I thought was stability was just a trap created by habit. Douglas still wouldn't let go completely. Though I blocked everything, sometimes mutual friends would message, "Hey, he's been talking about you too." I just shrugged, let people believe what they want. I no longer felt the need to explain, because I knew the more I justified, the more I'd drag myself back into that old, exhausting cycle I had fought so hard to escape. One evening, I sat on Avery's balcony, holding a warm cup of tea, watching the cars below. I thought about everything that had happened. No more anger, no more bitterness, just a strange feeling, gratitude. Yes, I was grateful to myself for not standing still one more time. Grateful for that suffocating party. Because without that moment of public humiliation, I might still be stuck cleaning dishes and wondering why I was so exhausted. I started writing more, not just journal entries. I wrote about the feeling of letting go, about things no one taught me growing up, like how to say no without guilt, how to love myself without needing anyone else's validation. Once, I posted a short piece online, not thinking much of it. To my surprise, a few strangers messaged me, thanking me, saying they were stuck in similar relationships. I suddenly realized my story wasn't just personal anymore. It was a voice that many hadn't dared to speak. Douglas, I heard he finally had to move back to his parents' place. Claire said he left the apartment like a war zone. I wasn't surprised. You can't suddenly learn to clean up when you've spent your life relying on someone else's care. I moved into my own place after nearly 2 months. A small room, white walls, nothing much besides a desk, a bookshelf, and the plant I brought along. But this time, everything was mine. Not just the physical stuff, but the space, the rhythm of life, the peace I had built with my own hands. The first night in my new place, I didn't play music or watch a movie. I lay there, listening to the ticking of the clock, and for the first time, that silence wasn't frightening. It felt like a gentle affirmation. You did it. I don't know what the future holds. There might be lonely moments, moments of self-doubt, but one thing I'm certain of, I'll never go back to being anyone's shadow. I wasn't born to clean up other people's broken pieces, especially when they think it's my job to do so. Now I'm busy, busy living for myself. I thought I was fine already. After moving into my new place, after peaceful evenings with just myself, I genuinely thought my life had turned a new page. But it turns out, fine isn't a destination. It's just a pit stop. Some days, I woke up feeling light, but there were nights when the lights went out, and I asked myself, who am I now? For over a year, I had defined myself as Douglas's girlfriend. Before that, I was the well-behaved daughter in my family's eyes. When there was no one left to please, I realized I didn't know how to live for myself. Avery dragged me to a writing workshop. She said, "You're always scribbling in that notebook. Why not take it seriously?" I hesitated but agreed. I had no reason to turn down a chance to try something new, especially when I had nothing left to lose. The workshop was small, about 10 people, each with their own story. Listening to them share, I felt lighter. It turns out, I wasn't the only one who had been trapped in toxic relationships or lost themselves trying to be the likable version others expected. I started writing more, not just journal entries. I tried short essays, stories inspired by my own life. Nicknames and settings changed, of course, but the emotions were 100% real. Once, I boldly submitted a piece to a small blog. I didn't expect much, just wanted to see what would happen. A few days later, they replied, saying they wanted to publish it. The feeling was strange, not the jumping for joy kind, but a quiet confirmation. You're still valuable, even when you're not someone's someone. Douglas hasn't completely vanished from my life. I heard he's struggling, drowning in debt because he doesn't know how to manage money. My mom once asked, "Do you feel sorry for him?" I shook my head. I'm not happy he's suffering, but I have no reason to care anymore. One day, Claire texted, "Douglas asked me to pass on an apology to you." I stared at the message, thought for a moment and replied, "Thanks, but I don't need it. Not because I'm noble. It's just that some apologies come too late and only serve to ease the speaker's guilt. They don't do anything for the listener." Time passed, and I got used to my new life. I went to work, wrote in the evenings, and occasionally met friends. Things weren't perfect, but I felt like I was living authentically, no longer forcing myself to please anyone. One rainy afternoon, I got an email from an online magazine asking me to collaborate long-term. I read it over and over, my heart racing. I thought back to those days, curled up in a corner of Avery's place, thinking my life was nothing but wreckage. Now, I'm rebuilding, bit by bit, with my own hands. I no longer avoid the past, I write about it, even the parts that make me ashamed of how weak I was, how much I endured. I know that only by facing it can I truly move forward. Once, Gabriella, a friend of Douglas's, messaged to thank me for what I shared. She said, "Because of you, I realized I'm stuck too." I smiled. Turns out what I thought was just venting could inspire someone else. I don't know if I'm strong enough to love again, but one thing I'm sure of. If I do, it'll be a relationship where I can be myself. Not a housekeeper, not a shadow, and definitely not a punchline for someone's amusement. One evening I sat by the window, watching the city light up. I no longer felt as lonely as before. Instead, there was a strange sensation of peace. I realized this journey isn't about finding someone to fill my voids, but about learning to stand firm without needing a crutch. When you walk out of an old, creaky door, don't expect anyone to roll out a red carpet for you, but trust me, once you step out, you'll see the sky is far wider than the window you once thought was the whole world. And I, Haley, the girl once called Maid with benefits, am now the one writing my own story. No need for applause, no need for validation. All I need is to know that I'm no longer living to be the backdrop of someone else's life.